I am being watched. Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest Season 3, Episode 21. It's called Beta. So spoilers for the episode. And yes, Beta is how I shall pronounce it. Everyone who says Beta, I do not respect as a human being. But anyway, this is a big episode. We kind of knew we were getting into this final stretch of the season. It felt like everything was kind of building up, but Samaritan turning on, at least for this temporary period in the one city. And we get a nice taste of what it's like with Samaritan and the machine kind of both at odds with one another, both getting access to the same information. Our team have to try and avoid cameras and any kind of surveillance just as much as the bad guys sometimes have to. And even then, it's not that often the bad guys do it. It's only occasionally, and it's mostly been Decima's people, really, that know enough about the machine to try and avoid those things. So a lot of this felt quite fresh. It felt like we were really evolving how we sort of deal with the action in the show. All of it's been really well set up. Finch is missing, of course, for the majority of the episode, because he kind of ran away at the end of the last one. But the big inciting incident of this one is that Decima, because they can't find Finch, Uncle Nolan says, we'll find someone who, or I think it's the tech guy who suggests it, but find someone who's close to Finch. And the computer, Samaritan, to say the right thing, discovers Grace. So Grace becomes a huge element in this episode, and is what a lot of it revolves around. So, a couple of little details here that I quite liked was the idea that we, instead of seeing the machines transitions in the episode, once Samaritan's turned on, we see its interface instead, and the way it searches through images, there's a different timeline kind of visual. There's only one flashback, but even for that one flashback, the way it went down a timeline was very different. It was vertical instead of horizontal. It's a big difference. But it did a lot to sort of say that this was slightly newer. It was slightly more sleek, and it was kind of the alternative version running a different operating system, if you want to call it that. So I kind of appreciated just those little visual touches, and also just the idea that once they brought in the idea that Grace was going to be the person that Decima were going to target, and the Samaritan had offered up her name, it was so nice to get that flashback right after of her at the memorial service. She's the only person there with the priest. It was it was a nice little detail because it was basically showing you how Samaritan figured out she was important to him, that she was the only person at his funeral, and that made her the only person worth mentioning in some capacity. So, I'm sure there was other things that the machine or that Samaritan found, but that was like the key piece of evidence that was easy to show the audience. And it was a good thing to show as well for an emotional perspective, because seeing her get upset and wonder why she's the only one there. She wasn't expecting a huge crowd, but is she really the only one who saw how special Harold is? And it's a really smart little scene because it does a few things. One, it really sets up the heartbreak she went through after Harold's, quote unquote death. It also sets up this idea of how betrayed she might feel if this all turns out to be something she didn't have to feel, that she was lied to. There's more things in the episode, of course, that really set that up, but this, even here, it's already starting to feel like it's there. But just in general, this idea of like her being the only one there further emphasizes how just cut off Harold has made his own life. Like, you can sort of see it from her perspective of being sad for him, but in a weird way, it's kind of justified. Like, even with us knowing everything we know about Finch, it's still true that he's had to kind of live his life in this really, solitary manner where he's kept himself cut off from everyone. And arguably, Team Machine, the current little cast that he's got, is the most of a group that he's ever had, right? He's had a couple of one-on-one people, right, in the past, of course, but this is maybe the most of a family he's ever really kind of built in some capacity, even though he's never quite let himself give into thinking of it that way. So I think this scene just kind of emphasizes the idea that he has kept himself so cut off, and that's something that he's been doing for a good chunk of his life because of the machine. And he's even done it before then, of course, but he went into overdrive with it because of the machine. So I think that scene really kind of like sets all these things off nicely. It's all working concurrently, and all the stuff early on with them dodging cameras, Root helping them out, trying to figure out where to go. Like, all of that is relatively entertaining. It's, it's problem solving. It's like thinking of like, okay, where are the dead zones? Where in the city can we go that we won't be seen? And when they do go to get Grace, which they're not even planning on at first, the phone rings, the machine lets them know about Grace, and Root even challenges it and says, "We don't have time for a number right now." And Reese says, "Hey, Finch would want us to save the person that needs saving, so tell the machine to just give us the name." Like, he actually demands, like, a number's not good enough. Just get the machine to give us the name. And then Root hears what the name is, and instantly her demeanor changes because she knows who that is. And when they realize that it's someone being targeted because of Finch. So from there, though, is where the episode really kind of picks up, and we really get into the fun and the drama of it. And just the general kind of like skeleton in the closet, or the elephant in the room, maybe a better phrase to use, of Finch being alive, and will Grace find out this episode? And I'm actually a little surprised that she doesn't by the end. I really thought she might. There's a couple of points where I really thought it might come up. I thought Uncle Nolan might have done it just out of spite, especially when she was saying how Harold would never lie to her. I thought, like, he gives a little smirk, and I thought, maybe he's just going to do it. Certainly during the handoff at the end of the episode, I really thought, oh, maybe, like, even though it seems like they're going to not do it, she'll just catch a glimpse of him at the last second, and just enough to question, like, did she just see Harold, that kind of thing. And they never did it. They've kept it secretive for now. Now, will we ever get that moment? I suspect we could. I suspect we might. It could even be Harold's final thing. Assuming Harold makes it to the very end of the show, it could be his happy ending, is him going off to Italy to see her, because she's got a job in Italy, even though she didn't show up for the interview. I wonder which company that Harold owns did that. But regardless, the fun of, like, when they actually get to her, though, and they're protecting her, as they go to the police station, but obviously that's not hidden from Samaritan. There's cameras everywhere, even more so than there used to be, as Fusco points out. So they're all kind of like having to deal with the fact that they're kind of sitting ducks in the police station, and the bad guys are kind of surrounding. They send in like one of their cops that they've got, to come in and get her, and Reese has to, punch him in the interrogation room. And it's all just kind of fun because all the various characters are kind of working in unison together quite effortlessly. It feels like, Reese, Fusco's leading this guy to Reese, but previously Shaw was kind of like giving him some, lip up front. When Root shows up and she kind of asks for a bunch of things from Fusco, he's able to do that for her. They kind of felt like a well-oiled machine, pardon the pun, where everyone was kind of chipping in, but at the center of it all is Grace in the middle. And of course there's the moment where she sees the missing poster for Detective Stills, which is the badge that Reese has been using for pretending to be a cop. So now she's got reasons to doubt, like, that she's heard anything true over the previous little bit of time. But I did really like some of the little beats here with Fusco, especially one before she finds the poster, where Fusco kind of assures her that those other two that brought her in, Reese and Shaw being the two, that, they are the good guys, and they've saved his neck, more times than he can count. And it's just like, it's one of those things where, like, regardless of any other lies that are being said, there's these like glimmers of truth. And it really got me thinking about her relationship with Finch, particularly when they do get her, right? Because they do a whole thing to try and distract the bad guys so they can get away from the police station. It doesn't work, though. They get Grace, and Grace is sort of held captive, and Uncle Nolan comes in and talks to her with a tea set, of course, because he has to be super, super British. But when he's asking her questions, and he starts asking her various things, he eventually kind of gets on to her love life and says, hey, you were never married. Was there ever anyone? Kind of dances around it a little bit. But she ultimately says there was someone, but he died a few years ago. And the name Harold comes up, and he asks, oh, how did he die? And he clearly knows what he's saying. He knows who she's talking about. He knows this is all a lie. But when he starts to question, like, do you know anything about Harold that you know absolutely is truth? And she gets kind of upset and says, yes, he's kind, he's generous, he's these things, she starts listing all these things off. And I love how Uncle Nolan kind of sighs and gets a little bit frustrated. He's like, yes, all that mushy crap. Yes, I'm sure he's all those things. But she gets kind of high-tempered, and she starts like kind of firing back and saying, hey, Harold would never have lied to me. And she tells us part of her backstory, which is that she grew up with a father who was an alcoholic, and he always lied, And one of the things about that is that you'll get really good at telling when people are going to lie. Arguably, you get too paranoid that people are lying and you're too shut off, which maybe even suggests why Grace was never really in. I mean, we don't know if she was ever in a relationship, but she never married, certainly. We know that. She was still single for when Finch found her, of course, in the backstory. So it maybe kind of paints as to why she never did settle down with someone. Maybe she had trouble meeting people or staying with people because she always had this kind of too much of a guard up kind of thing. But she says that whenever Finch spoke to her, she didn't use that name, of course. She says Harold. But when with Harold, she could always knew that she could trust him. And it really got me thinking, again, a bit earlier in the episode, like I was saying at the police station, when she starts to like have reasons to doubt at what all these people are saying to her. But they're like, hey, if you go out that door, they're going to kill you. And any white lies that we have told in here to try and keep you safe are pretty innocent. We're just trying to save you. And it really got me this idea that even with all the lies that are kind of around everything with Finch and her, all of his feelings were obviously true. And he never lied about how he felt. He never lied about, his interests or what he wanted to do with her. Like, all of that was completely genuine. And I think that's why I really like this scene that she has with Uncle Nolan, because you of course know that if she finds out, she is going to feel betrayed, right? It's impossible for that not to at least be there for a while, right, when it first comes up. But I think her saying that she always knew she could trust him is accurate. I think her instincts were right. I think ultimately, well, he was lying about, where he worked or what he was doing for a living and like what his past was. All the things that were important that he wanted to let her in on, he did let her in on. All the things that were personal that he never lets anyone else in on. So I think there's a genuine moment to that. So it was both sweet in the sense that it really kind of was helping like solidify this romantic relationship they both had. Not that it was lacking before, but now she's in this situation of peril and she's sticking up for Finch even now. It felt like, oh, this is really endearing. But also, this is really going to hurt if you find out that there was a lot of lies attached to that, even though technically everything you thought was true was still true. All those things that gave you that gut feeling, I think, are still valid. And, Uncle Nolan does kind of smirk a little bit to himself when she says some of this stuff. And I really thought he was going to just unleash the truth at her. But he doesn't. He just kind of, wraps up there pretty much. And as far as this stuff goes, like it's kind of left in this interesting note where when Team Machine get her back by the end, they don't. Yeah, well, it's after the handoff. Obviously, they don't get her back via saving her. There's a whole thing where eventually Finn shows up and they have to do the swapsy. But when they have her at the end of the episode and Reese is saying, hey, here's a plane ticket, you've got that job in Italy, you'll get a new apartment, everything will be fine, it's a good time for a fresh start, on you go. There's a little moment where, as he's walking away, Grace says, did you know him? Did you know Harold? Is he what this was all about? Because obviously she was asked a lot of questions about Harold, so she has enough information to think that he has something to do with this. And I really did not know what Reese was about to say, or even what I wanted him to say. But it was clearly just a great little moment. There's a little pin drop moment of like, oh God, what is he? Like, he could say anything here. And not that I thought he would say anything bad or try and I expected there was going to be a bit of honesty, in the same way that there was a lot of honesty wrapped around, the lies were wrapped around a lot of honesty earlier on in both the relationships you had with Finch and also the protector at the police station. I felt like he's going to be very coy with what he says, but I think he's going to say something true here. And he does. He says, you loved him and he loved you back. And that's kind of it. But I guess I almost thought he was going to maybe say something about him from his personal viewpoint, like maybe say something about, he's the best boss I've ever had or something like that, or something to that effect, to kind of say, yeah, I do know him, or I did know him, right? Kind of keep it vague. Don't let her know he's alive right now, but say something along those lines. And he didn't quite do that, but it was still kind of sweet getting her to hear that and know that this had something to do with him for some reason. So that was good. And obviously the actual stuff with Finch and the handoff is the security camera across her apartment goes off, and that gives them a hint. Root tells them that, so they go and see Finch just sitting there, because Finch at this point has realized that she would be targeted and wanted to try and warn her, regardless of it breaking the lies and the fake death and all that. And he's like, no, you're going to hand me over. You're going to make the swap because she's more important. So it's very selfless in a lot of ways. He kind of sees it as him facing the consequences of for making the machine, that this day was inevitable. He says a few things along those lines, particularly right before they're handing them off on the bridge. And it's obviously like interesting to hear that. The big notable moment though for this absolutely is the line where he says to Reese, I would prefer no violence, of course, but if they hurt Grace, kill them all. This really stuck out for the obvious reason, is that this is a complete 180 from what Finch usually says. He usually wants pacifism, he wants as little as violence as possible, he wants to not hurt people. He certainly doesn't want to kill people. And when he started that sentence, when he said, if they hurt Grace, like, you knew what he was going to say. In some way, you knew it was going to be a variation of kill them all. It was actually more to the point than I thought it was going to be. I was thinking he was maybe going to say don't hold back, or do things Shaw's way, maybe is perhaps maybe more of a direct implication without saying it outright. But no, he just straight up says kill them all. I think, and I like the moment. I think I understand it really sells the idea of how he feels right now, and even him with his ideals and his morals that are normally very sound, and he really tries to cling to his morals, perhaps because he's felt so mixed about what he's created and everything else. But he cares so much about Grace that he is just as guilty and just as susceptible to giving in to that passion the same way that Reese once did when the love of his life was killed. Right? This is something that he is now relating to Reese that he perhaps couldn't relate to directly before, is the idea of her being in danger. And I think my favorite part of the scene though is the way Reese snaps his head and looks at him when he says this, because it sells the line so well. As good as Emerson is delivering the line, it's the reaction of Reese, the man who has been the most beneficial from Finch trying to give him a conscience, hearing this man say kill them, and the sort of almost the strike of lightning, it feels like it just went down his back as he's heard this. It sells it in a way that works really well. This is the beauty of serialized storytelling, and how much, like, if you have one character saying do A for almost 3 full seasons, and then something makes them say no, do the B option instead, it has weight, right? That's a really simplified, dumbing down of it, but it really does have some weight when you've been going this long, especially when it's been such a key part of the themes and the relationship between Reese and Finch this entire time. So I think that was the moment as well where Reese realized that there was no talking Finch out of being handed over. I think that was the moment where Reese realized that if this was him, he would want to be handed over to save who he loved. And he doesn't even try and argue after that point, I don't think. I mean, maybe I'm misremembering, but I think at that point he stopped suggesting other things. He just kind of like accepts that this is what Finch wants. He does say to Finch, though, as he's walking over the bridge, hey, stay alive because we're coming for you, which was a nice enough little moment as well. But of course they played with the heartstrings because they have her blindfolded so she doesn't see who Finch is. But there's a little moment as they're passing on the bridge where she stumbles and he has to help her up without saying anything, and she says thank you, and it's just a little moment just to give him a little sense of like communication. He's close to her, he held her in his arms for just a brief second for the first time in years. They're pulling all the heartstrings. It's very effective, it works. And at the end of the episode, Uncle Nolan says, like, yeah, I mean, it seemed like the least I could do is to have her blindfolded. After all, you've been a hard man to find. So the cliffhanger at the end of the episode is these two facing each other, Uncle Nolan and Finch, one-on-one. I'm very fascinated by the debates, the moral debates, or whatever else might come out of this conversation that we're possibly about to get with these two. So very excited for that. I thought all that stuff was really exciting and enjoyable to watch. As someone who's, over the course of the season, it's hard not to fall in love with the characters. It's hard not to care about where their stories are going. And this feels like, I think for Finch especially, because he has this weird relationship with the machine and his guilt and how he kind of shackled it in a lot of ways because of his guilt and just all those things that have been running through his character. I think in some weird way, going through an experience where he meets the man who has built another version of the machine with more nefarious purposes might actually be good for Finch in terms of self-reflection. Maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll just make him feel worse. But I see potential there for a lot of outcomes. So, no, good stuff. And, obviously there's lots of little bits that I didn't even talk about. And I don't think I want to talk about all of them. There's a whole, like, them sneaking onto the boat that has all the servers. The one relevant thing from that is that Root steals 7 of the servers that are going to Samaritan. I'm not entirely sure what they're going to do with those. I don't know if that gives them access to it in some way, or they can use it for something. I'm not sure yet, but I look forward to finding out. But it is funny that Shaw and Reese at the end of the episode are pretty down. They're like, "Oh, we have no Finch. We have no Finch, and we must scream." But Ruth's actually pretty upbeat. Ruth's got some ideas, and she's still talking to the machine, of course. There's even a little bit where they have a discussion in a diner in New Jersey because Samaritan's only on in New York. So if they leave the city, if they get out of the 5 boroughs, then they're fine. They can't be seen, at least by the machine anyway. So, I know there was lots of little things like that sprinkled throughout the episode that were just them problem solving the plot. And then even when they do find where Decima are, where they're running Samaritan out of, it's like, well, they've chosen this place because there's no surveillance, but that also means the machine can't help us here either. So we have to kind of do this blind. We have to do it the old-fashioned way, which Shaw is actually quite excited about. But, it does present, again, more things. Because, there's such a common thing ever since Root became the mouthpiece for the machine, is that Root will always show up and kind of just know things because the machine says, hey, there's a gunman round the corner. I mean, hell, the episode even starts with that. Root pulls them into the alleyway and is like, hey, there's like 3 vans up there with like guys with machine guns. This is an ambush because Samaritan's online. So it was quite interesting that in that section of the episode where there was no surveillance, so there was no machine help, no Samaritan, it was really interesting that there's a moment where Root almost gets shot because a red laser sight appears on her and it's Reese that kind of pushes her out the way. And it was a fun little moment for like, hey, Root's only alive now because the old-fashioned techniques by the people who are trained to deal with these situations were able to save her ass. So I kind of like that of like showing, hey, yeah, Root's got this great cheat code and she's very, very efficient with it. She uses the information from the machine. She looks like a badass constantly. But it was also kind of nice to be like, no, like Shaw and Reese are trained to do this and they're better at doing this blind than you are. So that was just a nice little thing in that part of the episode. The tech guy willingly kills himself as well, rather than give any information up. Something that Uncle Nolan's very confident about. So, yeah. So it was a great episode. I really have very little to critique about it. I think everything from them having to dodge the surveillance and the cameras, like waiting for cameras to turn at traffic lights, things like that, is just a fun way to flip the entire premise of the show on the heads of the main characters who normally have a machine that's doing all this work for them. Now there's a villainous spawn, so now they have to deal with all these tactics, which changes the game, makes it feel like a very different type of episode, makes it a lot of fun. And then on top of that, you've got the great little touches like the interface for Samaritan being very different from the regular machine. But that's all just the little fun details that I like. The meat of the episode, the heart of the episode, is the relationships. It's them caring about Finch. It's them trying to save Grace because she means something to Finch. And don't get me wrong, they'll save a stranger. That's been a big part of these characters for a lot of the show. But because it's someone who means something to Finch, there feels like an extra personal connection to her and wanting to save her. And the scenes where she talks about Harold are particularly quite good. And make her feel very fleshed out for a character who's only been in a handful of episodes, really, when you go back and count them. A few flashback episodes here, a few flashback episodes there, and that's been pretty much it. So, there you go. That is my thoughts on this not quite penultimate episode. We've got 2 more left in the season. but I am so excited to get to these last couple of episodes. So I will see you soon for the next one. Let me know what you thought of this in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all the usual things. And of course, you can support all the content and help keep it coming over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. You can also support, if you would like, via YouTube membership, if that's more your thing. But thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?